Good morning, I'm John Dickerson. Earlier, I spoke with Republican presidential candidate Carly Fiorina, who is in Manchester, New Hampshire. Well, I want to talk to you about what voters should think about when they're thinking about non-politicians and being fit for the job. You had an interview just after Donald Trump spoke to radio host Hugh Hewitt. He asked some questions about Islamic terrorism and being commander-in-chief. You answered those questions. You also said what you didn't know. Donald Trump had more difficulty. Let's listen to a little bit of what he said.
Do you know the players without a scorecard yet, Donald Trump?
No, I'll tell you honestly, I think by the time we get to office, they'll all be changed. They'll be all gone. I knew you were going to ask me things like this, and there's no reason because, number one, I will hopefully find General Douglas MacArthur in the pack.
Donald Trump said that this kind of specific knowledge didn't matter. He would delegate. He'd get up to speed in 24 hours. That's what people in business do. You were a CEO. Is he right about that?
I disagree with him on that. I think it is very difficult to lead if you don't have the requisite knowledge. And I think it's perfectly acceptable that you don't know the name of every terrorist leader. I don't always either. I do think it's important to know who our enemies are. I think it's important to know the difference between Hamas and Hezbollah, and to know as well that both of them, for example, are proxies of Iran. I do think we've come to a place, though, where people realize that running for political office all your life isn't necessarily the most qualifying set of experiences either. I mean, we have a professional political class. 80% of the American people now think we have a professional political class that is either unwilling or unable to challenge the status quo of Washington and get anything done. And we have festering problems in Washington, not to mention a lack of leadership around the world. I understand how the economy works. I understand how the world works and who's in it, who are our friends and who are our enemies. I understand how big bureaucracies work, which is what Washington, D.C. has become. I understand technology and I understand leadership. And I think those are the necessary experiences and qualifications to become President of the United States.
So in keeping with this business theme, if you were on the hiring committee, would Donald Trump be fit to be commander-in-chief?
Well, that's not a question for me. That's a question for the voters of this country. I am most definitely fit to be commander-in-chief, and that's why I'm running for that office.
I'd like to ask you about Hillary Clinton's server. In the interview she gave to Andrea Mitchell, she said it wasn't the best choice, having her own private email server, but she also made another case, and she said basically she came into office, there was a lot going on, a lot to be focused on, and she wasn't really paying super close attention to the formation of her email server. As somebody who has also been in a top post, who's had to drink from that fire hose, do you find that explanation plausible?
I actually don't, because it takes a lot of work to install a private server system in your basement. It takes a lot of work to make sure that you are having the right connections to conduct both personal and professional business over that system. We know, for example, that she hired into the State Department a political operative who had done IT work on her campaign and for her PAC, and that IT operative was paid $5,000, not by taxpayers, but by Mrs. Clinton herself, to do IT work on that basement server. So that actually takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And so I don't think it's plausible for her to say, oh, I wasn't paying any attention. She clearly was paying attention.
Other news from the week I'd like to get your reaction to, which is the migrant crisis, the refugees, these pictures we've seen. What is the U.S. role in this humanitarian crisis?
Well, those pictures are unbelievably heartbreaking. And unfortunately, we have known this crisis was coming for a very long time. This is an example of what happens when the United States fails to lead. President Obama had options in Syria 3 years ago, and he failed to exercise any of those options. And he has watched as this humanitarian crisis has grown and grown. It isn't surprising, actually, that these refugees are pouring out of Syria. We now have somewhere between 43 and 60 million refugees on the move around the world because they are trying to escape conflict zones like Syria. The United States, I believe, has done its fair share in terms of humanitarian aid. Certainly the United States has not led. as I indicated earlier. I think the United States, honestly, sadly, cannot relax our entrance criteria. I mean, we are having to be very careful about who we let enter this country from these war-torn regions to ensure that terrorists are not coming here. I think the Europeans need to continue to step up here, both in terms of the amount of money they provide for humanitarian relief. They have not done as much as the United States has done on that front. And I also think they are beginning to step up and let some of these refugees cross into their borders. But sadly, this is a crisis that everyone should have known was coming for at least 3 years now.
All right, Carly Fiorina, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, John.